Personally, I'm not a fan of hyper specializing life stage ministries, but at the same time, there is a aspect of it that's necessary. So I think it really matters. Like, for example, if your small group ministries are just geographically based and it's not life stage based, I do think it's nice to be able to have some kind of ministry where that age demographic that life stage demographic can kind of get together. But I do get concerned about hyper specialization in life stage ministries, just because I think it can kind of produce consumers because they're so well targeted. The affinity is so strong, this sense of coming out of self to be a part of a community. I think it presents a little bit of challenge there. But if you do have specialized ministry, then I think it's important for church to find intergenerational connections. And if you don't specialize, just find opportunities for them to connect.
Totally.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. Especially as Asian Americans, and growing up in a Korean American church, I mean, there were so many departments and so many different life stages that we chopped up our adolescent child experience. And so when you're just used to spending 3 years in this ministry, 4 years in this ministry, after college, you get kind of, that becomes a habit. That becomes like the way you view church and ministry. You always want to be with your peers, whether it's as a single adult, married without kids, married with young kids, married with older kids, empty nesters, all of these things. And I definitely think that there's danger in chopping up the church in too many different pieces. So at our church, we always warn our members about preference. And we don't want the church to be Steve-shaped or Alex-shaped or Michael-centered. But we really want to encourage our members to, be servants and to belong to a greater body and a greater community that's multi-generational. At the same time, we know that, for a lot of people's felt needs, we have to address them. We can't just ignore them. Be like, hey, singles, it's not about you, it's about Jesus. Come serve in this ministry and be a part of the church. Like, we have to address those needs in a way that, enables them to experience community, but then hopefully lead them to see the church as bigger than just a 3-year, 4-year department, but it's a multi-generational body.
Yeah, because it's really about meeting people where they're at and taking them where they need to go. Yeah. But where do you meet them at? What's that point where you come and incarnate and then disciple them to this place? It's always hard.
Yeah, and I don't think there's a one size fits all model. There's a church is at a different evolutionary stage. Some churches, they might need to collapse and fold their young adults ministry. Yeah. Other ones, they might need to create stronger culture. I have a question for you guys. Let's say there's a church pastor listening to this, and it's hard for him to get single adults. Hard, difficult. What are some onboarding maybe felt needs that you guys were mentioning? What are some things that you feel like maybe need to be addressed to help kind of reach that demographic? Any thoughts?
Do a marriage, single, sex, dating sermon series. Our church used to grow when we did stuff like that. I mean, but again, I feel like that's meeting them where they're at. They're interested in those things. They're thinking about those things, and then just maybe taking a break, especially if you're an expositional preacher or a book by book, verse by verse preacher. Sometimes just take a pause and address biblically the very things that they're thinking about. Because sometimes we as pastors, we're addressing the problems that they don't actually struggle with, but maybe just getting to the heart of what they're going through. And that's a whole new world because of Coffee Meets Bagel, Tinder, all the dating apps. Mm-hmm. It's a different world, and so we have to redo our stuff to be able to minister to them and kind of shine some light of the gospel on their reality. So,
yeah, I mean, for us, we were trying to grow our singles ministry as well at our church, and it began with questions. And I asked, why do you come to our church? But then why? What about your friends? Would they come? Would you invite them? And they said, I grew up here, I'm loyal here, I'm faithful here, but I would never invite my friends. And I asked, why? I was like, well, there's and they were pretty blunt. They're like, because we kind of suck. And I was like, then we have to change that. And so just realizing that there are certain things that an emerging generation, a millennial generation, they value in the church experience, and just taking the time to ask questions, maybe having the leadership and vision and courage to reshape a couple things. And over the last 4 years, we've really seen a group grow. but it began with questions.
Yeah.
It began with questions and asking young adults.
And I would also add, I don't know if I learned this from Stephen or Tim Keller, but I learned in church planting, preach and speak to the one who isn't in the room. And so I remember when our church was like 10 people, and I would be like, hey, so those of you who are Buddhist, and our core members were like, hey, we're not Buddhist. Why do you keep saying that? And I said, if I don't speak to the Buddhist that isn't in the room, you won't bring them. If I don't speak to the atheist, or if I don't speak to the LGBTQ community that isn't in our churches, then you will never think to bring those. And so it was a very strange thing, but it really was speak to the one who isn't there. So that's kind of like that whole why I said marriage, But another interesting thing for me as an Asian American is, what do we mean by young adults?
Yeah.
Right? Because in Korean churches, young adult meant singles ministry from 22 years old to 40-year-old, if you're single. When I went to Barnes & Noble, young adult books were middle school, high school kid books. And so I think even culturally, how we define young adult, I actually was wondering that with this question. I didn't know we were talking about youth students and single post-college, or are we talking about singles? That's another thing for us to think about. How do we define young adults?
Yes.
You know.
Hey, good stuff, you guys.